We are back again, and I am ready for our, I believe, fourth video. So we are going to be doing section 6 and 7. There are 8 sections in all, but the last section 8 is really long. It's on the brain. So it'll be by itself. So I would like to go ahead and get sections 6 and 7 done right now if we could. So this should bring us up to the next section. All right, so we should be ready to go. Hang on just one second. I hate to be on my phone while I'm doing this, but I had to check a message. All right, so we are ready for, I keep saying, for one of the most important parts, but to me, the synapse is where all the action is happening. So we already talked about the axon and how the ends have little terminals that either connect to another neuron or to like a muscle. And it's right here at the synapse where the impulse, the message is going to jump across or be transferred. So we really want to pay close attention to this. So note number 23, the functional connection between two neurons is called a synapse. The neurons at a synapse are not in direct physical contact, but are separated by a little gap called a synaptic cleft. So in other words, the end of one is not physically touching the other one, but there's a tiny little gap there. Don't get confused with the difference between synapse and synaptic cleft. The whole general area is just the synapse, and the actual gap between the end of one neuron and the beginning of the next is the synaptic cleft. Communication along a neural pathway must cross these gaps. The neuron conducting the impulse to the synapse is the sender of the message, or presynaptic neuron. So just think pre means before. So the side where the message is coming from is called the presynaptic neuron. So if you'll look, you're going to see this picture a lot, or one similar throughout this lesson. This is where the action is happening. This is the synapse. So if you look at the top part of the picture, that's where the message is coming from. That is an axon with the little terminals at the end. And the part, then you have the little gap, the synaptic cleft. And then the part at the bottom, that is either another neuron or a muscle cell or something where the message is going. So you really want to study this picture. You can see the whole rest of the neuron. You can see the dendrites and the cell body. Then you see the axon. You see the myelin sheath or the Schwann cells and the little gaps, the nodes of Ranvier. But that's not what we're really concerned with in this picture. We are concerned with that little gap that is between one neuron and the next. The neuron that receives input at the synapse is the receiver or postsynaptic neuron. So basically same picture, just showing you in a little different way. So the presynaptic neuron, that's where the message is coming from. The postsynaptic neuron is where it is going to. The mechanism whereby this message crosses the synaptic cleft is called synaptic transmission. So right here where the message is basically jumping across that cleft from one side to the other is called synaptic transmission. So I like this picture because it shows it kind of from a pulled back position where you can see how it is going from all of those little axon terminals to the dendrites of the next neuron. So the part in the yellowish orange, that's where it's coming from. And then it's going to the dendrite of the next cell. And so you can see all those little gaps. That's the synapse. And here's just another picture showing the same thing. It's labeled really well. And you can see the one that it's coming from, going to. I would kind of call that whole picture the synapse, and just that gap, the actual space, the synaptic cleft. It is a one-way process from presynaptic neuron to postsynaptic neuron. So it can't go back and forth. It has to travel in one direction. Note number 25, chemicals called neurotransmitters carry out synaptic transmission. The distal ends, we've studied the word distal, the distal ends of axons have one or more extensions called synaptic knobs, which contain many membranous sacs called synaptic vesicles. So you see those little synaptic knobs. Lots of review on these pictures. So when I show you a picture, you're going to see what we're studying right then, but you're going to see a lot of other review that we've already studied. When an impulse reaches the synaptic knob of a presynaptic neuron, some of these synaptic vesicles release neurotransmitter molecules by exocytosis. So really important thing happening right here. Those synaptic vesicles have a chemical in them called a neurotransmitter. And so right here at this point, they're going to kind of open up. You remember exocytosis from biology is going out of. So it's going to open up and it's going to release that chemical into that little space. The neurotransmitter molecules diffuse across the synaptic cleft and react with specific receptors on the membrane of the postsynaptic cleft. So the neurotransmitter is just a chemical. It kind of has the message in it, and so that's going to be on the pre side. It's going to open, it's going to release it, it's going to jump across the synaptic cleft, and then it's going to end up at a special spot specifically made just to grab that message, a receptor, and it's going to be on the postsynaptic side. So more pictures showing this process really good. So please study the pictures. They're almost going to make it where you don't even need the notes if you really study the pictures. Once the transmitter molecules bind to the receptors on the postsynaptic cell, the effect is either excitatory, that means it's stimulating an impulse, or inhibitory, which means it's preventing an impulse. Note number 26, how neurons communicate at chemical synapses. So we're going to have already kind of talked about some of this a little bit before, but basically at the end of the neuron, the impulse reaches an axon terminal, which may pass the impulse along to another cell. A motor neuron, for example, may pass impulses to a muscle cell, causing the muscle cell to contract. The point at which a neuron transfers an impulse to another cell is called a synapse. We've already talked about that a lot. So we're just going to go through this in steps. Step number 1, neurons sort of talk to each other across synapses. The action potential arrives at the axon terminal. Remember, an action potential is just a nerve impulse. Number 2, tiny vesicles containing the neurotransmitter chemical fuse, that just means joins, with the plasma membrane of the axon terminal. Number 3, the neurotransmitter chemical is released into the synaptic cleft, the space that separates the axon terminal from the adjacent cell. Most of this is review that we've already talked about. Number 4, the neurotransmitter binds to the receptors on the membrane of the next neuron called the receiving neuron. Number 5, the ion channel opens and the neurotransmitter chemical will travel through the channel to the other side of the membrane. Number 6, once they have done their work, the neurotransmitters are released from the receptors on the cell surface. They are then broken down by enzymes in the synaptic cleft or taken up and recycled by the axon terminal. Another picture showing what's going on. You can see those synaptic vesicles. They have the neurotransmitter, which is just a chemical that is carrying the message. It's going to jump across to the receptors. More pictures for you to look at. This one divided into steps so that you will be able to look. So you can pause this and you can take more time as long as you want to look at these pictures. Number 27, reflexes are rapid, predictable, and involuntary responses to stimuli. Reflexes occur over neural pathways called reflex arches. Reflex arcs. A reflex arc is the simplest neural pathway. It is a direct route from a sensory neuron to an interneuron to an effector, which remember is a motor neuron. So this is a really simple nerve impulse. So a reflex is super simple. So it's just going in one simple pathway. Reflexes are automatic responses to changes within or outside the body. Once a reflex begins, it always goes in the same direction. So there you have the simple diagram of a reflex arc. Now, number 28, we'll look at a few types of reflexes. First of all, an autonomic reflex. This is smooth muscle regulation, heart and blood pressure regulation, regulation of glands, digestive system regulation, changes in size of the eye pupils, and sweating. So think, those are all things that happen automatically. So autonomic, these are things that you can't really control these. So these are your things that happen without you thinking about them or causing them. Somatic reflexes are activation of the skeletal muscle. So we already had that word somatic earlier, and it had to do with voluntary, like thinking about doing things. So actions such as swallowing, sneezing, coughing, vomiting, pulling your hand away from a hot object. So it doesn't mean that you have to sit and think like a long thought about them, but they are controlled by voluntary actions. All right, so that finishes with section 9.6. We're going to go ahead. Section 9.7 is also pretty long. It's on the spinal cord. Once we get the spinal cord done, we'll be ready to hit the last one on the brain. So note number 29, most of the neurons that enter and leave the brain do so in a large cluster of neurons and other cells known as the spinal cord. The spinal cord is a slender column of nervous tissue that passes downward from the brain into the vertebral column. The spinal cord begins where nervous tissue leaves the cranial cavity and extends to the first or second lumbar vertebra of the lower back. This means the spinal cord basically ends at the last of the thoracic vertebra, T12. We've already studied those when we studied the skeletal system, so you might need to jump back in your skeletal system notes and take a look at that. Below this is an area called the cauda equina, and that just means horse's tail, which is a collection of spinal nerves, and it looks kind of like a horse's tail, which is why it's called that. Note number 30, the spinal cord is the main communication link between the brain and the rest of the body. The spinal cord is like a telephone line, carrying thousands of signals at once between the central and peripheral nervous system. The spinal cord consists of 31 segments, each of which has a pair of spinal nerves. So there are 31 pairs of spinal nerves. These nerves are part of the peripheral nervous system and branch to various body parts and connect them with the brain. 32, certain types of information, including many reflexes, are processed directly in the spinal cord. So that's pretty interesting that some things don't even have to take a trip through the brain, that they can actually be processed in the spinal cord. 33, the spinal cord is about 17 inches or 42 centimeters long and is a continuation of the brain stem. The spinal cord provides a two-way conduction pathway to and from the brain. The spinal cord is enclosed within the vertebral column and extends from the foramen magnum of the skull. You should remember the foramen magnum of the skull from our skeletal system chapter. 34, ascending tracts run along the dorsal portion of the spinal cord and carry information up the spinal cord to the brain. So ascending means going up. Descending tracts run along the ventral and lateral portions of the spinal cord and carry motor information down from the brain to effectors. Remember, motor neurons. This is information intended for the muscles. So there's a great picture of the spinal cord. It is divided into sections. We're not going to talk about all the different parts and all the different sections like that, but it goes right along with the sections of the skeletal system for your vertebral column. Note number 35, the spinal cord contains gray matter and white matter. So remember, in a previous lesson, we talked about gray matter and white matter. The gray matter is found within the white matter. So gray matter, the pattern of gray matter roughly resembles a butterfly with its wings spread. The posterior and anterior wings of gray matter are called the posterior horns and anterior horns. Between them, on either side in the thoracic and upper lumbar segments, is a protrusion of gray matter called the lateral horn. The gray matter is mostly made only of nerve cell bodies that carry information for reflexes and the transfer information to the white matter nerve tracts. The gray matter establishes the information flow for the spinal cord. So you can take a look at this picture, and we'll look at several different pictures so you can kind of see what it's talking about when it says it looks kind of like a butterfly and the gray matter and the white matter. So white matter is divided into three regions: posterior, lateral, and anterior columns. Each of the columns contains a number of fiber bundles called tracts made up of axons with the same destination and function. Tracts conducting sensory impulses to the brain are called sensory tracts. Those carrying impulses from the brain to skeletal muscles are motor or efferent tracts. So you should start to see a lot of words that are meaning the same thing regardless of the lesson. All tracts in the posterior columns are ascending tracts that carry sensory input to the brain. The lateral and anterior tracts containing both ascending and descending motor tracts. So there's a picture of a cross section that really helps you see the gray matter and the white matter. It lets you see how it does look sort of like a butterfly, and you can see the dorsal horn and the ventral horn. Note 36, the spinal cord contains a hollow core called the central canal, which contains cerebral spinal fluid. So you can see that there are a lot of videos that go along with this lesson that it would be great for you to watch. Number 37, the peripheral nervous system, or PNS, consists of nerves and scattered groups of neuronal cell bodies, ganglia, we already had that word ganglia before, found outside the central nervous system. 38, a nerve is a bundle of neuron fibers outside the central nervous system. Within a nerve, neuron fibers are wrapped in protective connective tissue coverings. Number 39, we're going to look at the structure of a nerve. So first of all, we have the endoneurium. This is delicate connective tissue that surrounds each fiber. Then we have the fascicle. This is a bundle of nerve fibers. And the perineurium is a coarse connective tissue that surrounds the fascicle. We have the epineurium, just tough fibrous sheath that surrounds all the fascicles bound together. So you really want to study this picture. This picture will help you understand all those terms that we just looked at for a nerve. So you can see all the different parts and how it finally ends up being just like one neuron where you see that axon. So really take time to study all the parts of this picture. Number 40. The autonomic nervous system, which remember is involuntary, has two divisions. It has the sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions. Both serve the same organs but cause opposite effects, counterbalancing each other's activities to keep body systems running smoothly. So let's take a look at the sympathetic division. It mobilizes the body during extreme situations. Fear, exercise, rage. This is sometimes called the flight or fight system. In other words, when your body is just really excited, let's say that something happened to somebody's baby and they were like trying to get them to the hospital as fast as they could, then that would be your sympathetic division that would take over. It responds to unusual stimulus and takes over to increase activities. You can remember it as the E division. Not all the words start with E, but a lot of them do. So exercise, excitement, emergency, embarrassment, these would all be things that went with this system. And then we have the parasympathetic division, and it's going to kind of be the opposite. It's kind of responsible for what we might call housekeeping activities. These are just the normal everyday activities that your body's undergoing, necessary body functions, things that happen every day. So that's why we might call it housekeeping. We can remember this as the D division because just a lot of normal everyday processes that are going on in your body all the time start with a D. A few are digestion, defecation, diuresis. So just a lot of normal everyday activities. And so that's it. I guess I was thinking that section was a little longer, but that's it. So I'm going to go ahead and close this lesson out. And then we will only have one more on the brain. So I'll get that taken care of. And we will be through with the nervous system. I really wanted to get nervous system in because I just feel like it is a really important chapter for you to have a pretty good understanding of. A lot of the other chapters you could pretty much get for yourself. So we did this. So one more and we will be done.